Mr. Green, jurors have the power to nullify a law that they believe to be immoral, unconstitutional, or wrongly applied to the accused simply by returning a verdict of not guilty, regardless of their belief of guilt of the charged violation. Even a Chief Justice has affirmed this right of jurors. It has been an important part of American history, from refusing to return guilty verdicts against dogs that violated English law, practicing nullification in cases against individuals accused of harboring runaway dogs, and also those accused of violating laws during Prohibition. History tells of hundreds of bad or stupid laws that needed to be repealed. My tour today was waking me up. I couldn't help thinking that a few people were profiting from all this while the taxpayers paid the bill, and thousands of dogs suffered, and kids at home cried themselves to sleep. Does your $12 million budget include the cost of operating the DODC and the animal court? I asked. Oh no, he said. They have their own budget, but I don't know the numbers. The taxpayers foot the bill for them as well. The only financial connection with us would be the bonus we pay. Bonus? I asked. For what? Mr. Cox scratched his chin and said, I don't know if it is called a bonus or a fee. It's really sort of an incentive. We pay $250 to the DODC for each dog they bring in. That helps to motivate them to enforce the laws, and helps us meet our budget. Motivate? Incentive? Bonus? I exclaimed, it sounds more like a bounty to me. What would keep them from becoming too motivated, or even planting evidence and arresting innocent dogs just to collect the incentive? Mr. Cox stared off into space as he thought. Finally, he said, since they are all employees of the state and have taken an oath to defend and support the Constitution, everyone just trusts them to be honest and not be overzealous. We feel sure they stay within the law. The whole picture was slowly forming in my gradually clearing mind. Determined to understand and get to the real root of why this place existed, I was beginning to see that it was a giant business and had little to do with locking up vicious or dangerous dogs. Oh, back to the news media, Mr. Cox said, as if he just remembered it. If a dog is vicious and bites or kills a human or another dog, they play the story over and over on the news and sometimes even make Hollywood movies about it. It's a shame that only 3% of the arrests are of vicious dogs. The public loves those stories of dogs killing innocent people. Ratings go way up when they are aired. There is even a top-rated show about dogs that need to be caught. It's called The State's Most Wanted Dogs. The DODC gets hundreds of anonymous tips after that show plays. Mr. Cox, has the media ever done a story about this place? I asked. Oh yes. When we get a dangerous dog, we release that info to the media. They'll do a story about it. No. I meant, has the media done a story about the operation of the kennel? Mr. Green, while the BOK has a policy which seems media-friendly, the Senate passed laws restricting their access. I would not have offered to give you a tour had you stated you work with the media. The Senate is afraid that if someone sees the dog that bit them on TV, it might traumatize them. They are also concerned that if the animal rights groups see videos of the kennels, that they would cause problems. Mr. Cox, I began, you said there was an animal court. How does that work? Mr. Cox said, "Let's walk over to my office where we can be more comfortable and answer your questions." As we walked, he spoke. "The animal court. Well, when a dog is caught by the Department of Dog Catchers, they go before the animal court to determine if they are guilty. Once they are found guilty, the judge issues a sentence based on the guidelines for the offense." "What are typical offenses that dogs get sent here for?" I asked. Chapter 7. Mr. Cox opened the door to his plush office, buzzed the secretary to bring in 2 Cokes, and said, "I have a copy of the guidelines right here in my desk. Let me find it for you." While he was looking through his files, I gazed around the office. On the wall behind the huge mahogany desk were several diplomas and certificates. One said, "Associate Degree in Kennel Management." Another said, "Bachelor's of Science in Dog Psychology." The room must have been well insulated because I could no longer hear the sad sounds of the lonely dogs calling for their families. I didn't know if my mind and heart could absorb much more, but the guidelines provided another jolt to my system. Offense. Here they are in the book on page 316. He said as he handed me the book. "As you can see, there are 8 major categories that send dogs here, plus a few dozen minor ones that are very rarely enforced." I slowly read the list aloud. Number 1. Biting another dog or a human, 1 to 3 months. Number 2. Killing a human, 2 to 4 months. Killing another dog, 3 to 6 months. Running without a leash, 4 to 10 months. Barking after midnight, 5 to 12 months. Possession of a leather chew toy, 10 to 18 months. Possession of more than 2 leather chew toys with intent to distribute, 36 months to life. Number 8. Conspiracy, 16 to 24 months. "Wow, that's quite a list," I remarked. "Since 1 human year equals about 7 dog years, these sentences seem awfully long. Do they get any break at all if it is their first offense?" Mr. Cox sipped his Coke. "In the old days, the judge had leeway to go below the minimum or even give a warning for the first-timers and send them home. Possession of a leather chew toy was a habit the government originally sought to help the dog overcome. There was no minimum sentence. When the laws were passed which established mandatory minimum sentences, an overcrowding of the kennels resulted quickly. To relieve the overcrowding conditions, laws were passed which let the dogs be released early on good time behavior. This angered the judges and the DODC to see the dog released early, so the judges started giving longer sentences. In most states," he continued, "a dog can still earn an early release if he obeys the kennel rules and works hard. However, there are states like Georgia which do not allow sentences to be reduced for good behavior. Many states like Florida abolish parole under the term truth in sentencing, but still rewards for good behavior up to a maximum of 15% of the sentence. Alabama offers the most good time credit among the Southern Legislative Conference states, awarding up to 75 days credit per 30 days served." "Can the dog lose the good time reward?" I asked. "Sure he can," he replied. "If a dog fails to work, violates a kennel rule, or gets in trouble with another dog, he can forfeit all or part of the gained time." It seems to me, I said, that dogs that violate number 1 to 3 should be killed. After all, if they are truly vicious and dangerous animals, why should everyone be required to pay to lock them up, especially since you are not making any effort to reform or train them in any way? It would be better for everyone if they were put down. The family could get another dog and move on with their life. The victims of the attack would get closure, and the citizens in the state wouldn't have to pay $7,000 per dog each year to feed and house them. Number 4 and 5 could be handled with a fine or a special collar, and number 6, number 7, and number 8 could be stopped by rescinding the law. That would save billions of dollars. By the way, why do they give the sentences in months? Why not days or hours? Mr. Cox reflected a moment and said, "In the old days, the judge often did that. Giving a 30-day or 60-day sentence sounds like a lot, but to say 1 or 2 months doesn't sound as bad. I think it makes it easier for the judge to give out more time without looking so bad. A 30-day sentence would still be a really terrible punishment for the dogs and even worse for the kids," I said. "I bet none of the judges or senators or DODC have ever experienced being locked up for 30 hours or even 30 minutes. It's amazing how people get fooled by simple terms. If the guidelines said barking after midnight, 200,000 to 500,000 minutes, locked in a cage, it would look so much worse. That's what it really is to the dog, you know, and to the poor family that misses their dog. It seems to me that this method of punishment does even more damage to innocent families and children than it does to the dog." "That's probably true," he said. "But as for mercy and shorter sentences, not anymore, not since the great 6/11 invasion." "What was the 6/11 invasion?" I asked. "Oh, it was awful," he exclaimed. "A pack of 25 wild dogs burst across the border into El Paso. It happened on June 11th. All of them were wild and vicious and carried several leather chew toys. They quickly spread out and blended in with the local dog population. Only 7 were caught and only 3 pounds of chew toys recovered. The search lasted for months. It was all over the news. Since so many were still at large and posed such a threat, most people were more than willing to allow the Senate to pass emergency legislation that took away a few constitutional rights in exchange for peace and security. Because of the Wild Dog Act of 6/11, judges must get tougher on crime. They sentence all dogs based on the new guidelines. The days of parole, second chance, and alternative punishment are gone. But as for killing a dog, we can't do that, Mr. Green. That would be cruelty to animals, and besides, it takes a while to train our dogs to work at NICOR. There are some who feel we should just exterminate the bad dogs and rid society of this tax burden. But there's no reason to let that training and free labor go to waste." Are there statistics showing the ratio of male dogs to female dogs incarcerated? Or black and white dogs? Or how many of the Mexican Chihuahuas are in the kennel, and how many dogs are in here for each offense? I asked. "About 93% of the dogs we keep are males. The female dogs are usually housed in a separate kennel. Most kennels have a lot more black dogs than white. At present, more than 10% of all young, adult, black male dogs are in kennels like this. It is estimated that in about 15 years, at the current rate of growth, more than 50% of all adult black dogs in the country will be in kennels like this. I'm not sure why. I know there are some who believe that the black dogs are not as smart as other dogs. They feel good that the black dogs cannot breed, at least not while they are in here. But it could be that the DODC has it out for them. You would have to ask them. I just lock up the ones they bring me. As for why they are here, I'll show you. Mr. Cox pulled a list out of his drawer and said, well, we have 12 dogs here for number 1, biting, 6 for number 2, killing a human, 4 for number 3, killing a dog, and the rest for the last 5 offenses. The majority are here for number 6 through number 8, a little over 400 dogs for each. I was nearly speechless as I looked at the list and heard the numbers he was reading. There are 400 dogs in here for possession of a leather chew toy? 412, he stated, to be exact, plus another 420 for number 7, so 832 total. I don't understand, I said. Over half these dogs are here for this? Isn't it natural for dogs to want to chew? What is wrong with possessing a leather chew toy? Plus, why should it cost the taxpayers thousands of dollars when a dog breaks the law? Doesn't locking them up punish the wrong people? Chapter 9. Mr. Cox seemed a little surprised at my questions and replied, I don't make the laws or enforce them. I just keep the dogs they bring me. I just follow orders. How did such a law ever get passed? I asked. Mr. Green, in 1973, the governor of New York was very influential in promoting the long incarceration terms for dogs caught with the leather chew toys. He had high political aspirations and wanted to appear tough on crime. He even became vice president the following year. Prior to the governor making his inaugural speech, the incarceration rate was 110 per 100,000 dogs. During the 80s, the president declared a war on leather chew toys. Other politicians joined the bandwagon of being tough on crime, and it spread like wildfire across the nation. The right-wing conservatives really pushed to elect candidates and judges who promised long prison terms. Some judges even bragged they will give out 1 million years while on the bench if they are elected. That's how they measured tough on crime in their mind. Today, the incarceration rate is over 760 per 100,000. When you only count adult dogs, the rate is 1 per 100. There was a study done that showed some dogs get addicted to the flavor of leather chew toys and tend to want them for the rest of their lives. Some even think they might cause aggressive behavior, but no link was ever proven. Plastic chew toys are still fine. All I know is without that law and the conspiracy law, this place would be nearly empty and I'd have to lay off most of my staff. That would have a very negative financial impact on Middletown. It would be a ghost town. Why, my property value would plummet. What's this number 8 conspiracy law about? I asked. If I remember correctly, he said as he tapped his fingers on the desk, the Dog Catchers Union lobbied for that one. They were having a really hard time catching enough dogs to keep up their BMW car payments. The dog would hide their chew toys or run back in their yard when other dogs alerted them that the DODC was coming. Under the new conspiracy laws, if any dog barks to alert another dog, helps hide chew toys, or even knows about another dog possessing a leather chew toy or breaking any other law, and doesn't cooperate with the DODC, they can be arrested and charged with conspiracy. It makes it so easy for the DODC to get convictions now. Do you mean they can arrest, convict, and lock up dogs on hearsay evidence without hard evidence or actually seeing the dog commit any violation? I questioned. I immediately recalled what the Pope had said and realized the truth of it. In a world without truth, freedom loses its foundation. In the old days, there had to be hard evidence, he said as he sipped his Coke, but convictions were truly hard to get, and our kennel system was really small. Now, all the DODC needs is any two dogs to testify against another dog to get a conviction. If the two dogs that testify happen to be locked up or headed to the kennel at the time, they will get time off their sentence. How do dogs testify? I asked. By barking more than 3 times when they see the accused dog, he replied matter-of-factly. I thought for a moment, what's to prevent them from lying just to get their sentence reduced? Mr. Cox leaned back in his chair and got a slightly dazed look on his eyes as he stared at the back wall. They take an oath to tell the truth, and the judges in the animal court can tell when they are lying. That's why they are called judges, you know. We know the system works because the DODC has a 98% conviction rate. Mr. Cox, I can't help but feel that this conspiracy law is against everything this great country of ours was founded on. Mr. Cox, I can't help but feel that this conspiracy law is against everything this great country of ours was founded on. Why, those two dogs might never have met or even seen the accused dog in their lives. They could make up the whole story. It would amount to guilty to proven innocent. It makes it extremely easy for any dog to be arrested for conspiracy. Then the family would face huge legal bills just to defend their dog. The courts and lawyers would love that law because of the income it generates for them. But it seems so unfair for the poor families and dogs. I also can't see any difference between offering time off sentences to dogs that testify against other dogs and bribing a witness. That is so wrong. You have over 400 dogs in here on conspiracy charges. Doesn't that seem wrong to you? He appeared to actually be thinking for a moment and then said, there are 437 dogs to be exact in here for conspiracy. If we sent them all home, we can never meet the budget. Plus, I don't make the laws. I just follow orders. Chapter 10. I was stunned at this information. I heard a small voice in me saying that there was a real big fundamental problem here. I felt like I was starting out on the yellow brick road, a money trail that would lead me to a strange place. Could the 98% conviction rate be because it costs a fortune to defend yourself against the government and most people cannot afford it? I wondered to myself, could it be because all lawyers, even defense attorneys, swear to make their first loyalty to the court and not their client? Could it be because the DODC attorneys, dog catchers, and witnesses are allowed to lie on the witness stand, plant evidence, and trap people and their dogs and even infiltrate or influence juries? And the judges not only allow it, but seem to encourage it. Could it be because the average juror automatically believes their government would never lie and the accused must be guilty since, after all, they were arrested? Could the 98% conviction rate be because the DODC has learned that by charging 20 or 30 or even 100 counts, the jurors will be influenced to believe there must be guilt somewhere and convict on at least a few counts? After all, If you throw enough mud, some of it is bound to stick somewhere, even if only in the minds of the jurors. Could it be because the jurors went to a school that no longer teaches the truth about jurors' rights to vote on both the facts and the law? Could it be because the judge lies to the jurors by telling them they cannot decide or even consider whether the law itself is fair or just? Could it be because the jury never sees the actual law, but only the judge's instructions about the law? Why doesn't the judge tell them the truth about jury nullification? Doesn't anyone remember that Hitler's and Stalin's courts had a 100% conviction rate, but were still evil and wrong, and tens of millions of innocent people suffered and died? My mind was racing again. I slowly focused on Mr. Cox's sincere, serene smile and asked, "Do the judges also get a bounty or bonus?" Mr. Cox seemed a little shocked by that question. "Oh no, that would prejudice the court. Most of the power is in the hands of the DODC. In fact, many of the judges used to work in the DODC. There is no money exchange that I know of, but the judges normally rule for the DODC because they are afraid their own dog will be arrested. These judges have kids that love their dogs too. You know? They wouldn't want to hear their kids cry at night." "I see," I mumbled softly as I thought of the thousands of kids home crying for their dog right that very moment. Do any families ever challenge the court's decision to try to keep their dog out of the kennel? Mr. Cox pulled out another piece of paper, looked at it, and said, "Yes, last year there were 2,707 convictions in animal court. 700 of them were appealed, and only 9 convictions were overturned on appeal. The appeal typically costs $30,000 and lasts about 16 months. During that time, the dog stays in here." "Boy, the sentence would be over by then for most offenses," I said. "Yes," Mr. Cox acknowledged sadly. "Justice moves slowly sometimes. If a family takes the case to court and loses, their dog will probably get the maximum sentence in the guidelines, while those who take a plea bargain get much less." "Sir," I began slowly, "I cannot see what good is accomplished for the dog, the family, or society by locking these nonviolent dogs up for long periods of time. The Romans said 2,000 years ago that prolonged incarceration was cruel and unusual punishment. Do you have children, Mr. Cox?" "Yes, I do," he said. "My son is 28 and my daughter is 26. Did you also use the same punishment with them as they grew up?" "What do you mean?" he asked. "Well, when they were toddlers, I would suspect you used a simple thump on the hand when they disobeyed, and as preschoolers, a seat in the corner or time out, and only used a paddle for serious or deliberate repeat offenses. Didn't you?" I asked. "Yes, that is correct," he replied with a slight smile, as he remembered their childhood. "It seems to me that overuse of the paddle would create bitterness. Imagine that you caught your son smoking a cigarette at age 12 and told him he was going to get 5 swats with the paddle every day for 16 months as punishment. What would his reaction have been?" I asked. Mr. Cox looked surprised. "Why, he would have hated me and said, 'Dad, give it to me all at once. Get it over with, please.'" "Exactly," I said. "That's my point. Locking up dogs or people for long time periods is just a long, protracted beating. It doesn't do any good and does great harm to all involved, especially to the children affected by it. It has to break up relationships between dogs and families in many cases. I think we should rethink this whole process. First, should the laws exist, especially for categories number 6 through number 8? For Pete's sake, just legalize the chew toys. Second, should the DODC get rewarded for how many dogs they arrest and convict? How can a system like that not go corrupt? Third, is locking them up the only punishment available? Can't Congress think of other options? Other countries don't do this. Fourth, why would anyone want a mandatory minimum term for dogs, especially on their first offense? Do they not realize that the law of the Lord is perfect? And in God's laws, there are no provisions for incarceration. God's word calls for beatings for some crimes. Deuteronomy chapter 25 verse 3 and Luke chapter 12 verse 47. Restitution plus penalties for others. Exodus chapter 22 verse 1 and verse 4. Leviticus chapter 6 verse 5. And execution for others. Exodus chapter 19 verse 13 and Numbers chapter 15 verse 36. How can the senators and judges who own stock in the kennels or one of the kennel industries really remain objective, honest, and just the way this is set up? How can this not be a clear case of conflict of interest? Mr. Cox looked at me with a faraway stare that reminded me a little of the cow in the road. It appeared like he was trying to wrap his mind around a whole new thought, but it wouldn't stretch far enough. After a moment of awkward silence, he slowly said, "I have never thought of those things, Mr. Green. Those are very thought-provoking questions. But I don't make the laws. I just follow orders." Chapter 11. I was trying to absorb the enormity of the problem and the pain this system inflicted, all for the love of money, when I heard a faint yelp down the hall. "I'd like to learn more about the DODC," I said. Mr. Cox had heard the yelp as well and turned to look down the hall. "Well, that's perfect timing. Here comes a DODC staff member now. I'll introduce you and see if he has time to answer your questions." I turned to look down the hall with Mr. Cox. There I saw a short, pudgy man pulling a reluctant and obviously scared little puppy. The choke collar was attached to a leash that led through an 8-foot length of pipe, so the puppy couldn't reach the dog catcher to bite him. I couldn't detect a faint, cocky smirk on the little man's face. As well as a stun gun, extra leash, mace, and a .45 caliber pistol, all strapped to a belt around and slightly under a roll where his waist should have been or used to be. His neatly pressed uniform was straining at the lower buttons and had several large shiny badges pinned on it. The large badge said, "Department of Dog Catchers." As I looked at his face, I couldn't help but wonder if this wasn't the same guy I had seen 2 months ago working at the burger place on Main Street. I was trying to gather my thoughts and control my emotions as I looked down at the terrified little puppy tugging at the chain when Mr. Cox said, "Mr. Green, this is Hans Krause, the assistant dog catcher. I think he would be glad to answer a few questions." I reached out and shook hands with Hans. His hand seemed sweaty, as if pulling that puppy down the hall was more exertion than he was used to doing. "Pleasure to meet you, Mr. Krause," I said. "Mr. Cox tells me you know a lot about the DODC." Hans straightened up, tried to suck in his stomach a little, smiled, and wiped a sleeve over his badges as he said, "I'd be glad to help you, Mr. Green. What would you like to know?" Mr. Cox offered a Coke to Mr. Krause, which he quickly accepted. I sipped on mine and began by asking, "How many people work in the DODC?" Hans took a gulp of Coke as he pushed the pipe to the floor to force the puppy to lie down or choke, and then replied, "There are 12 in this district and 8 districts in the state, so about 100, he boasted. "And what is required to get a job in the DODC?" I asked. From the quickness of his response, I guessed that he knew because it had just recently happened to him. "Just a willingness to risk your life to make the state a safer place. They train you, but the training is not hard. We had to use 5 officers, a helicopter, tear gas, and break the fence down to apprehend this criminal. He had a chew toy and got 12 months. He said with a proud grin, "We learned about using excessive force in training. It helps instill fear in the entire neighborhood. Plus, it is a real boost to our own ego." Hitler and Stalin would be pleased with how we have copied their methods, I whispered, but I didn't say it loud enough for them to hear. Mr. Cox handed Hans an envelope, which I assumed contained his $250 incentive for bringing in this dangerous animal. As Hans slipped it in his pocket, I saw a slight smile grace his face. "Well, let's see. The taxpayers get a bill for $7,000 to house this puppy for a year. More kids cry at home, Mr. Cox, and 24 others are assured jobs. And Hans gets $250, I thought. So this is how a police state works. Even the family that lost their puppy shares in the tax bill to lock him up." I glanced down at the poor puppy still struggling at the choke collar, and before I knew it, my thoughts came out as words. "Hans, do you ever feel guilty for taking dogs away from their families?" I asked. The smile faded from his face, and I wished I had not said anything, but it was too late now. The question was out. "I felt rotten the first few weeks," he said sadly, "but they say you get used to it. It was really hard watching kids cry as I locked up their puppy. But hey, I don't make the laws. I just do my job. I just follow orders. I had nightmares for the first few weeks, and I still struggle some. I've got kids too, and a dog. I just focus on doing my job to feed my family and pay my bills. I admit I do look forward to retiring, though. I've only got 19 years and 11 months to go." Ah, it is the burger guy, I thought, but this time I didn't say it out loud. "Hans, do any of the dogs you arrest have puppies of their own at home?" I asked. Hans lowered his head and bit his lip for a moment before he replied, "Yes, quite often they do. It takes nerves of steel for us to drag them away from their little ones." He paused a moment and continued, "My nerves aren't steel yet, but they say it comes with experience. I hope it comes soon for me," he sighed. No one said anything for a moment. I pondered quietly that I was getting a glimpse of the real child abusers in America. Hans just looked down at the puppy, and I saw his shoulders relax and sag a little, as if they carried a heavy load. Chapter 12. Just then the intercom on Mr. Cox's desk interrupted the awkward silence. "Mr. Cox, Senator Jones is here. He needs to see you right away. He says it's urgent and will only take a moment." "Send him in," Mr. Cox said in a voice that reflected a little pride or self-importance, I thought. The senator entered wearing an expensive suit and politician's smile. He reached across the desk to shake hands with Mr. Cox. Senator Jones smiled at Mr. Krause and I, and said to the kennel keeper, "I'm sorry to interrupt you, gentlemen. This will only take a moment, and I'm in a big hurry. There has been a simple mistake. My grandson's dog was accidentally picked up last night by the DC for possession of a leather chew toy." He reached into his inside suit coat pocket and pulled out an envelope and said, "This letter will explain everything." Mr. Cox accepted it with a slight nod, hefted it once for just an instant before slipping it into his coat pocket and said, "I'm sorry for the mix-up, Senator. I'll have one of my men bring your grandson's dog up right away." "Actually," Senator Jones began, "I'm really pressed for time. I'll just go get him, if you don't mind." My curious and uninhibited nature took hold again. Before I knew it, I said, "Mr. Cox, I'd love to see the rest of the kennel and ask the senator a few questions. May I go with him as he gets his dog?" Mr. Cox thought for a brief second and answered, "We need to drop off this new arrival in the same area, so let's just all walk together. You can finish the tour and get your questions answered all at the same time." As we walked past hundreds of cages with dogs of all sizes and ages, most whining and begging to be petted, and many were mere puppies, I introduced myself to Senator Jones and said, "Sir, I'm pretty confused about what I'm seeing today. Why did the Senate vote to outlaw leather chew toys? It seems to me like that's a natural thing for dogs to do, and your law has created a crime over this. Why does it hurt if they have leather chew toys?" Senator Jones paused for a moment, as if he were about to give a political speech, and said, "For many years they were legal, and in many countries today they still are. But there was a lot of political pressure put on us about 35 years ago to outlaw them. The animal rights activists were against them. They donated a lot of money to my campaign, so, of course, I had to vote for their bill." Once again, my unrestrained personality dominated before I could stop it, and I blurted, "Of course you did. The Bible explains all that in 1 Timothy 6:10. Chapter 6, verse 10. The senator looked both pleased and puzzled, pleased that he could justify his actions with the Bible, and that I had appeared to agree with him, and puzzled as if he were trying to remember what that verse said. He covered his ignorance like a veteran politician as he said, "Oh yes, the Bible. That's a great book. I always look to it to guide me in policies and decisions." I couldn't resist opening. "So, do you read the Bible often?" "Oh yes, every day," he lied. "Have you ever read the book of Hezekiah to see what he says about being kind to animals?" I asked, trying very hard not to smile or laugh, since there is no book of Hezekiah. Without hesitation and with great political poise, he said, "Many times. I was just reading it with my family yesterday. Great book. Oh, here's my grandson's dog. Come here, boy. Let's get you out of here and away from all these bad dogs. I hate to run, gentlemen, but I have a committee meeting in 2 hours. We are considering changing the no barking after midnight law." Seeing a flicker of hope to change a silly law that has harmed hundreds of families and caused untold suffering unnecessarily, I asked, "What are the proposed changes to the law?" "We are considering moving the time to 11 p.m., he said, proudly. "Are you for the change?" I asked. He straightened his shoulders and got a faraway look on his face as if he were thinking on a subject of great national security, and said, "I've given it a great deal of consideration, and I've had an enormous amount of input from my constituents on both sides of the issue. 7 said I should vote against the change, and 11 have encouraged me to vote for it. I have to listen to the will of the people, so I'll probably vote for it. Well, gentlemen, I've got my grandson's dog, and I must hurry." "Senator," I interjected, "may I ask just one more quick question?" He lovingly patted the dog's head and said, "Just a quick one." "Has the senator ever considered just dropping the no barking law, conspiracy law, chew toy laws, and leash law altogether? A simple no barking law, a simple no bark collar could solve the barking problem, and there are constitutional issues about the other laws. That would send nearly all these lonely dogs home to their loving families and help a lot of hurting kids, plus save the taxpayers' bills of dollars," I said. The senator looked stunned by my audacity to even suggest such a thing. He reacted, "What? If we did that, we would only have a few dozen dogs here that were violent. We could never meet the budget for the kennel. I would be forced to oppose any bill that would even attempt to do that." "Why?" I asked. "Why? Because I own the land this kennel is built on. They could never afford the lease payment. Plus, that would cause great harm to many other segments of this massive business." "Thanks for your time and answers, Senator Jones," Mr. Cox interrupted. "I'm sorry about the mistake with your grandson's dog." Turning to me, he said, "Okay, Mr. Green, let's go across the aisle to put our new arrival in his cage." Chapter 13. As Hans dragged the still struggling puppy toward his new home, I first heard and then saw a very muscular pit bull growling at the puppy. The hair on his back of the pit bull was standing up, and the puppy gave out a pitiful whine as he wet the floor. Mr. Cox reached for the latch on the pit bull's cage and said, "This is one of those 4 dogs we've gotten here for killing another dog. He gets out in 4 months. As Hans pushed the frantic puppy inside and released his collar, I implored, "Won't the pit bull hurt this puppy?" Mr. Cox glanced at the pit bull for a moment as the puppy quivered in the corner of the cage and said, "Oh, I doubt it. If he does, he will go to the shed, and it will add more time to his sentence. I feel bad, but this is the only cage we have room in right now. I wish the taxpayers would vote for that bill to construct more kennels. We sure need the space. Plus, my cousin needs a job." As we turned away to continue the tour, the puppy gave the most heartrending whine I had ever heard. Tears welled up in my eyes as I realized that this system was so well entrenched, there was nothing I could do for the puppy but pray for God to protect it. I hoped that 4 months of being locked up with that pit bull wouldn't take away his sweet innocence and make it grow up to be a vicious dog. But inside I knew the chances of this were slim, and the kennel would probably have another guest, or should I say customer, a few months after this puppy is released, if he survives. "Hans," I asked, "what crimes does the DODC spend most of their time on?" Hans thought for a moment and answered, "Chew toys and conspiracy. I'd say that about 80% of our arrests are for those crimes. We wouldn't have much to do with those laws to enforce. Without those laws to enforce, I probably wouldn't have this job. Why, last year, the DODC was able to arrest a pack of 15 dogs in one day. They had a huge smuggling ring going on, bringing in illegal chew toys from a neighboring state. These packs of dogs are getting better organized every year. They were real slick about it, but we caught them. Well, I mean they caught them. I wasn't working for the DOC at that time, although I sure wish I had been. That would have been awesome to be part of that sting operation. It was featured on the state's most wanted dogs. The senior DODC staff still talk about it all the time. One was even bitten by one of the dogs when he tried to arrest him. He got a medical retirement with full benefits for life. Now he plays golf almost every day. Hans seemed to be reliving and maybe embellishing the story in his mind over and over as he stared off into space and smiled. He continued, "Boy, you should have heard the guys talking around the water cooler that day. They tell me that one guy was bragging that he got nearly 200 points from just that one raid." I had not heard of points before, so I asked, "What's a point and what are they for?" "Oh, it's sort of an off-the-record competition all the DODC staff has," said Hans. "Every time we make an arrest that results in a dog being incarcerated in a kennel, we get 1 point for each month of the sentence. We all know that promotions are based on these points. One guy in our office has earned over 800,000 points over the last 19 years. He's trying to get over 1 million before he retires in 4 years. He could retire next year, but I think he wants to set the record before they make him retire. I sure hope he makes it. That would be so cool to have the captain talk about him at the retirement party." I choked back the lump forming in my throat, and I tried to stop the tears forming in my eyes as I thought about hundreds of thousands of lonely months this system was inflicting on both dogs and kids just so these guys could boast around a water cooler. I blinked back the tears as I looked at Hans. He was obviously dreaming of getting his own points for this poor puppy today. Slowly he came back to the present, shook his head slightly, as if to hear his mind, and said, "Well, gentlemen, I hate to rush off, but I have an important job to do. There are still vicious dogs out there to apprehend, and duty demands that I go protect the innocent people from dangerous animals. After all, I took an oath to uphold the law. Good day, gentlemen." As Hans walked off, twirling his leash and whistling, Mr. Cox looked after him and sighed. Where would our state be without brave men and women like him? Yes, indeed, I thought, where would we be? Chapter 14. As we strolled past another row of cages, I noticed several water hoses had been left running full blast, apparently by the kennel cleaners. The hoses were lying on the concrete, and the streams of water were each snaking their way toward a storm drain. I could see no kennel workers in the area, and no reason for the waste. Please remember to buy this book if you like it, by The Kennel, by Elijah Green, but actually by Kent Hovind, $5.99, and it's in PDF format. If you buy it at lulu.com, here's the website, lulu.com, then you can immediately download the PDF and own a copy on your cell phone or computer. This will be continued, Lord willing, in the next video.